I'd like to start with a very beautiful revelation of God to the Prophet Muhammad, where God says, I was a secret treasure, and I longed to be known. And so I created the worlds, visible and invisible. From this comes the insight that an authentic spiritual practice, prayer, is really rooted in an authentic, heartfelt longing from within. And in Islam it is said we all have these longings which is cosmically encoded in us. And when we get in touch with this longing, that's when we become a seeker. We incline towards spiritual practices. In many traditions, prayer is a central form of the spiritual practice. In Islamic mysticism, it is said that what is, in a sense, a barrier between myself and also my other self, meaning me becoming my higher self or connecting with my higher self, becoming a seeker, are two barriers, or called two veils of health and wealth. And all other veils are subsets of those. When my health is good, my family's health is good, or if I have wealth, meaning financial security, emotional security, all this talk about spiritual practices, particularly prayer, meditation, is not only distant, irrelevant, but very, very inconvenient. However, should one of those veils break, my mother has cancer, God forbid, or something happens to me, divorce, whatever the case might be, or a loss of money in the Wall Street, then suddenly deeper questions. What is happening? Why me? And then we have a longing from within for deeper answers. We become a seeker. We begin to understand what Rumi says, there is a kiss we want all our lives, a touch of spirit on the body. So a good question to always ask in a retreat like this is, what was your personal experience that drew you towards spiritual practices as an integral part of your life? Where you have knowledge of these spiritual practices, but as Prophet Muhammad said, you move from a knowledge of the tongue to a knowledge of the heart. So for me, in my personal life, it was my mother who came to visit me in 1990, and in 7 days she passed away. Very shockingly. When my father heard the news, in 20 days he passed away. So those events for me was my personal experience that really, in a sense, shattered the veil. And I was familiar with spiritual practices, but really I think in my spiritual practices, I was able to move from a knowledge of the tongue to a knowledge of the heart. So what is the central spiritual practice in Islam, which I do also, not regularly, as best as I can humanly? It is the Islamic body prayer, the 5 times a day prayer, where they use their human body to express praise and gratitude to God. And you stand in the presence of majesty, you bow, you prostrate, you sit up and you stand up again. And this is called salat. And 5 times a day, so that you can really, as the Quran says, remember your true center. The true center is not your ego. The true center is divinity. But of course, in the attractions and distractions of life, it is very, very easy to forget. That's why the Quran says, truly, truly, in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest. How else does the prayer bring you closer to God? The Quran says, can you remember one particular insight? And it is a simple verse. Be conscious of God. Be conscious of God. Be conscious of God. Whatever your definition of God is, Be conscious. Can you develop any technique which you can use in the course of your everyday life where you really are conscious of God? Remember God. In fact, another verse says, seeking only the face of thy Lord Most High, that one will know peace of mind. The Quran says if you're conscious of God, you organically receive a form of discernment, guidance. Something guides you. You know, Rumi, who just uttered when he saw this verse, he said, not only does the thirsty seek water, water also seeks the thirsty. So if you're conscious of God, whatever God means to you, as the Prophet Muhammad said, you take one step towards God, God takes 7 steps towards you. Walk towards God, God comes to you running. The other thing Quran says, if you're conscious of God, then in times of difficulties, the Quran says, Allah will provide a way of emergence in ways you could never imagine. Rumi says it's as if a stretcher comes to you from grace when you're conscious of God. I'd like to say just 1 or 2 stories, again from the mystical traditions of Islam. There was a man who was very prayerful. Allah, 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 praying 5 times a day, always praying to God. Till one day, and his lips grew sweet with praising. Till one day, a cynic came to him and said, a very skeptical person said, have you ever heard a reply back? And that question really pierced his being, and he gave up praying. And one day, Khidr is a deathless prophet in the Quran who comes to human beings when they're in times of need. Khidr came and said, why have you stopped praying? He said, because the answer, the reply, here I am, never came. And Khidr said, God has a message for you. He said, my dear brother, that anguished inner longing from within is the return message. The grief you cry out from drives you towards union. Your pure sadness is a secret cup. He says, listen, have you ever heard of the whining of a dog for its master? That whining is the connection. And the mystic goes on to say, there are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be just one of them. So you see, if I'm praying, it's as if I am deepening something within myself. Something is maturing. Something is centering. When I change, my world changes. You develop what Buddhists would call equanimity. I love that story which runs to many traditions. Let me take the Buddhist one. A monk, one moonlit night, his house is burned to the ground. And all he does is just look at the moon at night and says, finally a perfect view of the moon at night. Equanimity, that prayerful attitude.